Hi, I'm Ryan Davis.
And I'm Kiernan Schmidt.
And this is Out of Office, a travel podcast.
This seat taken.
Hey, Kiernan.
Ryan, I'm shocked I'm hearing your voice. I thought you were in total blackout mode.
Yeah.
Not for the usual reasons.
No. I tried to get there. It's hard on Spanish beer, but
wine is cheap in Europe, though.
True, it's true. And yesterday was a historic day in Spain and Portugal and parts of France. It was a total and complete blackout. So no power, but also no wireless internet. So no phones.
Oh my God. I can't. I struggle to imagine you without your phone.
Well, I was freaked out because I had so much calls I had to do, and I couldn't figure out a way to tell people I wasn't going to be at work. And so I spent a good hour walking around in a park near my hotel, and I got one bar of the E network, which is like a network from the 90s, I think. And I was able to make
one rickety satellite.
Yeah. I was able to make a voice call that only lasted for 11 seconds, where I told my colleague, there's no power in Spain, I can't make any calls, and then it died. And then
this is like something out of Lost.
I wasn't able to speak to them again until 11:30 at night. It was basically a full 12 hours.
And as of this recording, we still don't know what caused it.
Yeah. Weird. It's weird.
It's weird. It's not great.
It's one thing for Portugal to lose power. It's another thing for Spain to lose power, but for France, a country that, has a more legitimate kind of
what is this? I don't know. I'm saying far away from whatever.
No, they have it's just France and Germany. I think of France and Germany as Europe plus and
wow.
Everyone does.
Oh my God. Where do you put in this ranking? Where do you put Scandinavia?
Oh, Scandinavia is its own thing. The power doesn't go out in Scandinavia because I think it's probably raindrop powered or something.
We look forward to future reporting on the blackout. And I have to say, what did you do? Because obviously all the tourist stuff, you got a day off of work unexpectedly. Yeah. The tourist stuff's all closed. Did you just go out and enjoy parks?
The restaurants were closed. Parks were very full. So this is a funny situation. I'm staying in a hotel that is apparently geared towards students. So I've stayed in
that seems like a real coincidence that you happen to book yourself into a student hostel.
It's not a hostel. It's a fancy co-working place. And so yesterday, everything was closed. And so the place was just packed with people who are not in classes. And so we spent the day kind of smoking cigarettes and drinking beer that we got from the corner store.
Are you smoking cigarettes again? Europe has turned you back?
It was only on the blackout, only for blackout day. Because you couldn't charge your vapes. It's a lose-lose. So it was fun. I got to talk
that's an underreported side effect.
It really is. So I got to talk. We talked, and nobody had their phones. Many people's phones died. Other people kind of kept their phone with them as a security device, even though there wasn't anything to do. And this one kid was like, "I'm just going to start scrolling photos that I took." That's pretty soon.
Oh my God! It's like homemade Instagram.
Yeah, exactly. So that was fun, and it's an interesting mix of people. And so I didn't do much. I read a book and then I walked around, but I didn't walk around that far because there were no metros and there were no cars and there were no maps.
My God.
So it was it kind of made you feel how kind of over reliant we are on our.
No kid. Oh, I've thought about that a lot. I mean, based on reporting of, terrorist potential attacks on the power grid and things like that, for sure. Totally helpless.
Well, also, we didn't even know. It was a really funny moment. One of the college students went and bought batteries and had a battery powered radio. And so we're all sitting around listening to this radio, and he's French and he speaks Spanish. So he's translating this incredible kid, translating the Spanish radio into English and French for everyone who's watching. It was a whole production. He was very good at it. And so
it's kind of scary. You didn't know maybe this was the beginning of a broader attack or something. You have no idea. It's pretty scary.
it did feel there was a couple suggestions that maybe Trump was doing it, and I'm like, guys, Trump doesn't make any sense. Like, we can't even keep our own power grids.
That's when you dust off the Canadian patch for your backpack.
I just say Brooklyn. So
yeah, sure. Well, I'm certainly glad you're okay. I'm very relieved that you're plugged in. You're actually podcasting from your phone internet this time instead of your typical WeWork, because internet's not fully restored. And you know where they didn't have electricity and internet, Ryan? Ancient Rome.
Yeah.
Which is what we're going to talk about today. We already did our Vatican episode, which we'll of course link to in the show notes. But you're fresh from Rome. I've spent some time in Rome, and I'm married to someone who studied classics and spent a whole summer in Rome, has been to Rome several times. So we're well schooled in the Eternal City. And, I just want to be careful to say this is we did the Vatican in one. This is a first trip to Rome part one, because there's so much to do in Rome. This would be a 3-hour podcast if we attempted to even scratch the surface of everything you have to do. So we're going to do our best to get through a few major sites and give enough history and enough context that if you're preparing to go there, we're going to suit you up to be able to have a great trip, because we know this is a major tourist year for Rome.
Yeah. And Rome strikes me as one of maybe a dozen cities in the world that had multiple periods that are amazing and evident in the city architecture and art and food and vibe in a way that's like really unique, and we're going to talk a lot about like some of the Roman stuff. The Vatican is obviously like a Renaissance, pre-Renaissance era, but it's just like what amazes me about Rome is just sort of like how many things are built on it. Well,
I mean, and every time they try to do anything new, they end up uncovering some amazing ruin, and so it like halts all construction for many, many years as they excavate. There's just nowhere that you can put a shovel in the ground without hitting some sort of historical treasure.
And that's one of the interesting things about my trip around Europe this time, although it wasn't like Rome centric. In fact, Rome was added at the very last minute. I kept seeing like Roman ruins everywhere. In Cologne, I saw Roman ruins. And in Romania, I saw Roman ruins. And so I felt like I was building up to Rome. And just when you kind of travel around by train and plane, you get an idea just how expansive the Roman Empire was.
Oh, for sure. I mean, I remember
for two men to talk about the Roman Empire is literally a cliche.
Talk about clickbait. This is I remember being struck by that when I lived in London, which is there's still a Roman amphitheater. There's a whole museum that's a preserved Roman amphitheater, and there are modern buildings that in the basement you can visit Roman ruins. And then, of course, in the north of England, there's Hadrian's Wall, which was the northernmost boundary of the empire, where they literally built an enormous wall. It's not a fresh idea to build a wall on your border.
No. Hadrian was an interesting guy.
I mean, I wish we had time to get into all the individual emperors' personalities and quirks, and I'm going to give a recommendation on a couple books that I recommend for prep. I feel like we already covered the Judy alert, where we tell Ryan's mom where he is to make sure he's safe. He's relatively safe. Hopefully, he's charged up his phone right away. But
I'm all charged.
You're in Madrid right now, but you are fresh from Rome, and it seems like recently disaster has just been following you. You got the blackout right when you hit Madrid, and then of course you happen to be in Rome when an amazing piece of news came through that affects both you and I very, very personally.
Yes. While I was in Rome, I was just in Rome a couple days, and Pope Francis passed away. And he'd been sick very sick for a while, and elderly for longer than that. And so it wasn't a huge shock, but it was really something to be in Rome on that day. And so on the day that it was announced, on that Monday, I walked over to the Vatican. I didn't have any tickets to go in or anything, but at that point I was like, what's going to happen? Is my Vatican tour going to be canceled?
Sure. Yeah. I was Googling for you. When does Sistine Chapel close for conclave?
Right. And what I really wanted to see when I went there was something out of The Godfather 2, like a bunch of Italian women dressed all in black, like wailing and throwing themselves on the ground. And that wasn't happening. It was mostly like people trying to be interviewed by the media, because the media was there like trying to talk to people about the Pope, and people would like huddle around like waiting to be like pulled into CNN International or something.
Sure.
Sky News. So I was there early before like even the word, it just hadn't really like got out. In fact, people were finding out the Pope was dead while they
Did you try to start the wailing? It's kind of like starting a wave in the amphitheater, and gnashing of teeth, pulling of hair.
I just felt like there were people who were nuns, lots of nuns and priests who should have been there before me, in the wailing. But maybe they were thinking about, hey, maybe I'm, going to be up for Pope.
Sure. I mean, you and I are still holding out hope.
Yeah.
And did you actually? I know you were considering for a short minute. Do I go and get in line to see the body? Now, did you actually do that?
I monitored, there were a couple like Twitter accounts and live feeds that would let you see like what the line was. And the line was like 6 hours mostly. And
really? Was it 6 hours? Because you asked me how long would I wait to see the Pope's body? 6 hours was
That's
my
what
answer.
You said.
Yeah.
And I thought, I thought you were saying that because you'd read the same book.
No, I hadn't read it. That was truly my gut of like, what would I put up with? And 6 hours was where I was.
But that would have eaten, you have to think like basically an entire day. Would I have done that over one of the things we're going to talk about? And I felt like I was there for it.
Plus, it's kind of becoming your thing to skip the major attractions. Go to Romania, don't go to Bram Stoker's castle. You go to
Bram
Rome.
Stoker never went there either. So
one of the finest popes in history dies. 6 hours, a little too much for Ryan to look at his body.
I paid my respects in many ways
by following Twitter accounts of the line.
Twitter accounts.
It makes sense. Checks out.
Yeah, I went to the Vatican a few days after that, and I did my tour. And
did you get to the Sistine Chapel?
I did get to the Sistine Chapel.
Excellent. And what language was your tour? And I know you had to like grab whatever last minute ticket.
That one was in Italian, and I did another one in Spanish.
Did you pretend to follow it all? Like, were you just being clear? I don't understand this language, or you were trying to like keep your face so that everyone thought you were following along?
Somehow, even not understanding what the guide was saying, I was still in the top 10% most engaged people.
Yeah, nodding.
I was nodding.
Yeah. You're good at that.
Other people were like on their phones, and maybe they didn't speak Italian either. So
you and I are good on guided tours. I've observed that it's you owe the tour guide your attention. We should do a separate pod about proper etiquette. This will go down in history as one of the better pods, along with analyzing every picture in our passports.
Yes.
Which I believe there might be some new pictures, so we might have to do a follow-up there. Well, before we take off formally then, the only piece of business that we have to get to is a great new reviews coming in. Clearly, the Rick Steves 200th episode plea for good reviews to come in has delivered, so we're going to focus on a few of those and say thank you to those who wrote in, but also encourage other folks, go to wherever you listen to the pod, give it 5 stars, and especially tell us what you like and if you have ideas for other episodes, because we love hearing what you all want to hear. And so we have some very like clear, easy ones. Great show, 5 stars. This is from NCDU25. Really enjoyed the focus on underrated travel spots in Latin America and Eastern Europe. Clearly listening to your recent episodes, Ryan. We got a follow-up review from Queuea, Queuea. This is the person who famously coined "Does Ryan like Kiernan?" One of our favorites, going to be our pod T-shirt. And he wrote, "Updated, still love the pod. Haters back off." Real nice, going right after Cornhusker 55. And then we have another Yosemite 1, fun and entertaining. I just started listening to this podcast. I found it very useful and full of very good information on places you may be wanting to visit. It is very easy listening. Straightforward, wholesome, good review. Now, there's one that I just want to quickly talk about. It's called Like Talking to Friends by Cheese 29. And
that sounds nice.
It does sound nice, doesn't it? And when you read the beginning, it's nice. The show presents like a relaxing conversation with friends. Clearly, they get our vibe. It's entertaining. If nothing else inspires you to do some deeper research on these locations. My only complaint, okay, here's where we take a turn. My only complaint is at times I feel like the tone of Kiernan's voice sounds as if he is about to tell a joke. Period. Period. I think there's a code hidden in some of the typos down there at the end. But following on the stuttering review, now I'm being attacked for the tone. I just want to say, do people understand what this podcast would be like if Ryan were the only voice on here? Ryan's main contribution is to say, Kiernan, maybe we do fewer episodes. Maybe that's how we grow the podcast. Maybe we dial back to one a month, every 3 months. If I was not on this show, it would just be the sound of Ryan popping Ozempic, simping natural wines, and going through foreign grinder. That's what the sound of this podcast would be.
That might be a popular show. Different audience.
For those who are going to hear the call for reviews and reactions, I just want to say, would it kill somebody to say a nice word about he who begs Ryan to get onto the podcast, who says, I understand there was a blackout. I think your phone has internet. Surely you could get on for us to record an hour for our people.
You literally wrote me to yell at me for not updating the outline. I'm like, I haven't had the internet for more than like 2 hours.
Yeah. It's called work offline. That is a setting we all have in our Google Docs. Work offline. All right. Well, Ryan, with that, no jokes here. I'm trying to be very serious. Don't want to bring any jocularity to the following conversation. I think it's time for us to take off on our first trip to Rome.
Oh, the cabin crew.
Flight attendants, prepare for takeoff, please.
All right, Ryan. Now, was this your first trip to Rome?
Absolutely. First trip ever.
Is that true? I didn't. Okay. I had forgotten that. And my first trip to Rome, my only trip to Rome was in 2017 when it was particularly focused on the Vatican, but I made sure to add a couple days just to explore the major sites. And as always, I used my Rick Steves guide as my sort of core preparation. And that's because I mean, would it be an understatement, Ryan, to say this is one of the more overwhelming places to visit?
It's hard to describe how overwhelming it is because there's just so much to do and so much to see, and it's not all conveniently laid out. Definitely some of it is, but it's a big city. So I was overwhelmed entirely because another thing you have to worry about is opening times and buying tickets in advance. This is not a city you can just show up in and expect to be, in the Sistine Chapel the next day and then at the Colosseum. No, you've got to buy those tickets in advance.
Yeah, and the ticket system also is a little complicated. It's where certain tickets that you buy can let you into several different places, and so you want to make sure to maximize your euro that you've planned for your entire day. And they are not places that you can run in and out of in 45 minutes. These are places where you're going to be so overwhelmed by how many ruins there are to see or how many great artworks there are to see that, chances are you're going to need half a day to do a lot of these sites.
And I recommend, and you probably didn't do this because you're a man of the people, but if you can get the skip the line tickets in advance, you should do it because boy, are there some lines. I remember walking up to the Vatican and thinking I was going to have to wait in that line that folks were waiting in who hadn't bought advance tickets. And it was the biggest line I've ever seen.
Yes,
but luckily, I had walked right in.
Well, and, you had done a smart thing I know you were booking the Vatican museums late and you just booked the guided tour, which is a good way to get around because, yes, you're going to pay a little extra, but you get a assigned time and, you don't even have to really understand what the guide's saying as long as you've done your research before, but it gets you in.
Exactly.
And so I suppose the viewing of Pope Francis, future Saint Francis, I'm sure that didn't have a skip the line option.
Well, I would have paid a little for an indulgence to skip the line.
For sure. Definitely a missed opportunity.
I agree. The Catholics charge for everything else. So where were we there?
So a couple caveats to this, which is we're definitely going to do a third episode. We did our Vatican episode. Now we're doing an episode today that's going to focus on major ancient Roman ruins, I would say, and just a couple of museums. But there are so many museums, and not even like obscure sites, but just slightly more off the beaten path. You know, if you have 1 day or 3 days or 5 days, it's a big difference in what you can see. So take this truly as your first trip to Rome, part 1, and we are going to do another before the summer hits properly that's going to cover off all the kind of little hidden extra things. And like, I mean, I say that, and I'm even counting out neighborhoods that you must take time to see. But again, this is a city where just going for a stroll, you're going to come upon churches, you're going to come upon historical sites that could absorb you for hours. So this is just the major hitting stuff. And so,
and you know, some cities are not like showers. You know, some cities you have to kind of look, look for the magic.
Not a problem here.
Not Rome. Everywhere you go, like, you know, I was just, walking home, and I ended up walking by like one of the main attractions in the city that I didn't even know was like directly on my route, and I was like, astonished. It's like that kind of place.
And so as a result, I want to make 3 recommendations for to avoid being overwhelmed. A good way to prepare, of course, the Rick Steves guide, which we're always going to recommend. I think his Rome guide is particularly good because of the level of guided tours and the specifics around booking, like Ryan was talking about. But I will also recommend, I have a podcast, a book, and a movie I'm going to recommend if you're heading to Rome for the first time. The podcast is called The Fall of Rome podcast. This is a big history podcast, comprehensive, super fun listening, really dives pretty deep into the history, but it's accessible. And so we'll give a link in the show notes to the Fall of Rome podcast, but take the time a couple weeks before you head out to really dive into, and I think kind of by exploring the disintegration of the empire, they give you a lot of the history about what made the empire so successful as well. And it's going to give you a good sense of the place and history that Rome has and its long-reaching effects all over the world.
And this is a terrific podcast that I listened to years ago and have listened to elements of it since then. And it's great.
There's also a class assist whose name is Mary Beard. And Mary Beard is a trustee of the British Museum, and she's a classics professor at Cambridge. And she has sort of made her career on breaking down and making relatable and real and very fun. She's very funny, ancient Rome. And so I'm going to make the recommendation. She wrote a book that was a history of Rome called SPQR. And we're going to talk about what SPQR means because you're going to see that all over the city of Rome. But I really recommend that book. It is very accessible. You're going to be daunted by the size of it, but the font is large. And again, the tone is just very, very, I wouldn't say it goes beyond entry level, but it's very accessible and very fun. So it's going to go quickly, and it'll give you a good sense of Rome as a republic and Rome as a dictatorship and how one became the other, and sort of the core questions and dictates of the history that you'll be seeing all over the place there. And if you don't have time for that, Google some interviews with Mary Beard, some podcast interviews of Mary Beard. She's a great listen. You will be very charmed, and it will get you very excited to go.
Yeah, and this is a good recommendation. I haven't read this, but it comes up always in one of like the best nonfiction books of the last 20 years. There's so many books about Rome that are dense and hard to get through, that are from 100 years ago, that are, I'm sure, are wonderful, but are just not written for a popular history reader. And people just love this book, SPQR. It's really great.
It's great. Yeah. It's great. It has a pride of place on my shelf. And the final is a very light popcorn recommendation. I maybe download it for the flight over, which is a romantic comedy from the 1950s. It's called Roman Holiday. And this is classic Hollywood stuff. It's Audrey Hepburn, it's Gregory Peck, and they're falling in love, traveling all around Rome. You will still see, I mean, obviously, listen, most of this stuff is preserved. So you're going to, even in the 50s, you're still going to be seeing a lot of the same ruins and statuary that these two incredibly charming people zip by on their Vespas. And
back then you could probably run around the Colosseum and,
smoke
absolutely cigarettes while drinking wine.
You can put them out, but you can put the cigarettes out on the statues. Absolutely.
They encourage it. Now it's a $15,000 fine if you touch the walls.
I mean, the Roman holiday is just, it's classic. It's wonderful, and extremely charming, and will bring you into the romance of the city instead of just the cold history of it. So Roman holiday.
Gladiator 2 also.
I've never seen either of the Gladiators. So do you actually think, because, we can start off by talking Colosseum. Do you think that the Gladiator movies actually are good preparation for the kind of blood and dirt and reality of what happened there?
I think Gladiator 1, absolutely. Gladiator 2 is sort of a mess. But Gladiator 1, you've got Marcus Aurelius, who's a great Roman emperor. Maybe you don't think the greatest. I think one of the greatest. And you've got the Colosseum. And I was trying to think of a building. Are there even 10 other buildings in the world as famous as the Roman Colosseum? Like, I feel like I've known about the Roman Colosseum since I was 5. It's just like. And when I first saw it from the car on the way to my Airbnb, I was like, oh my God, that's the Colosseum. And the driver was like, no, for me, it's every day.
But surely he said it in an accent.
He did. Yeah.
And you're not going to do the accent?
No.
Even after calling Spain and Portugal sub-European or whatever you call it.
Just lesser.
No, you're right. I mean,
it's a huge, incredible.
I think you're right. First, I think we're not used to seeing ruins at the scale of the Colosseum. And there has been places where there were earthquakes that it fell, it was rebuilt, but a lot of it is still preserved. I think about a third of it is still preserved. And you're right that between the Colosseum and the Pantheon, you really are seeing two buildings that inspired tons. I mean, a lot of the classical architecture, right down to the White House and the Supreme Court and all these places that are looking to be distinguished and powerful here in the U.S.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's hard not to see that rhyme when you're going around.
So while of course we don't, while I recommend all those different preparatory documents to really get a sense of the history, just to give you a piece. Obviously, we've talked about it as the center of the Catholic Church, but when we think about the ancient Roman Empire, the civilization, we're talking really about 500 BC to 500 AD, and broadly speaking, the first half of that is democracy. And Rome is known as sort of the great model of democracy. And then you have Caesar, who turns the republic into a dictatorship. And so the first emperor, and then that stretch of 500 years, there's people who will argue about the exact number because you had several people claiming emperor and people coming in and out of the historical record. But you have about 70 emperors, many who, claim that title of Caesar, which comes from being a man to being basically a godlike title. And that is the span of the empire. And then you have that decline, which the podcast will give a lot of context around. And what I kind of love is this founding legend of Romulus and Remus. Ryan, did you see some depictions of this around the city?
Yeah. There's a famous sculpture of Romulus and Remus as babies who are feeding off the teat of the big wolf dog thing.
Big wolf dog thing. They call it a she-wolf because the idea is that these twin brothers, Romulus and Remus, were abandoned, and then they were fed by a wolf who took them in, and then eventually they were brought to a shepherd's family, and then they grew up to be these warring brothers. And as you can guess from the name Rome, Romulus, which the name Rome derives from, was the winner. Otherwise, we'd be talking about Reem.
Yes. And one of the things that's cool about this particular statue, and I'll post a picture of it on the Insta, is that Rome has given it out as gifts to all these different cities that used to be part of the Roman Empire. So when I was in Cluj, Romania, there's a huge sculpture of this exact, mythological event that is there. So it's a fun origin story. It's a good origin story, and it's stuck around for a long time.
Yes, and the statue itself that you're describing, it's depicted on a ton of the tourist material around town, the souvenirs. The original is at the Capitoline Museums, which we're going to cover in the next episode. But I was able to see it, and it's very funny to see these two little babies kind of suckling on this she-wolf. It's a very odd image. I think it's a very odd image, especially because it's become so iconic. And you will see it. That it's important that you know what it looks like, because you're going to wonder if you go without seeing it, why that's on so many T-shirts.
Yeah, it's up there with SPQR, which you see basically everywhere, from stamped on buildings to stamped on sidewalks.
SPQR, this is the it's acronyms. I'm famously bad at acronyms, FYI. There are two great weaknesses I have. One is remembering acronyms, and one is using the words sentiment and sediment interchangeably. Great weaknesses of mine, but in the grand scheme, those are fairly minor. But SPQR stands for, I'm going to do my best reading here, Senatus Populasque Romanus, which means the Senate and the people of Rome. So SPQR is this great, important piece of pride for this democratic history that Rome pioneered. Well, the place that I remember thinking it was so interesting that it still exists is if you look down at the manhole covers, like down to the sewer. That's how ubiquitous it is around the city, that it's still used by the city to mark city property. So it's a great thing. It's the reason that Mary Beard named her book SPQR, because of this proud history. Just two other historical points that I wish we could do many series on. The first is, we all know about Julius Caesar. I think Julius Caesar, one of the most famous historical figures, the person who was so charismatic, had so many military victories, that was able to claim power and convert Rome from a republic to a dictatorship. And as you mentioned, Ryan, there's many other emperors along the way who are kind of the standout ones who really either there's a popular imagination around them. That I'm thinking of Nero and Caligula as sort of the famous ne'er-do-wells, and there's a lot of history that much of this is played up by their successors to make them look worse, etc. But when you think of Julius Caesar, it is his adopted son Augustus, which, by the way, was the name that we actually were going to give to a boy if we didn't have Penelope. By the way, we were going to call him Augie, but he was going to name him Augustus, because
that's
Augustus,
Chase's middle name.
Is that right? Oh, wow. Acquaintance of the podcast, two-time Peabody loser, Chase Augustus. What a great name.
It is.
What an odd counterpoint to Chase, which is
that was a dad. I think the dad really wanted Augustus. So,
and then the mom was cool. It's whatever. Chase. And Augustus is really the one who built up the bureaucracy that it took, and the lawmaking machine and enforcement that it took to run an empire. And so Augustus is this emperor who just looms large over so many of the institutions that guided this empire for another 500 years. And he really is who introduced the period of time that's known as the Pax Romana, which is when you think of this vast empire, like Ryan was talking about, spread all across Europe into Africa. When Catherine and I were in Morocco, we actually drove way out into the wilderness just to visit Volubilis, which is a Roman city that remains basically untouched by the elements. And it's these beautiful ruins and standing columns, very reminiscent of what you see in Rome. So just this Pax Romana that was it was a violent time for the fact that they were acquiring land, but it was a peaceful time in that it was very organized, and there was a clear leading nation, which was Rome. And the final piece, which is so important to understanding everything you're going to see there, is the pantheon of gods that the Romans worshipped. The Roman religion was very fluid, and it got to the point where there were thousands, tens of thousands of gods. You had the sort of major ones, the major 10 that you could list off. Many of them were received and adapted from Greek. So Zeus became Jupiter, Ares became Mars, etc. But they also, as they acquired territories, they allowed adaptation of local religions into the core Roman religion. And so you had Egyptian gods and further on and further on. And that's how you ended up with thousands. So all over the city, you will see temples and statuary preserved in the museums that honor so many that I really recommend that you read the placards. And this is a place where you should also do some additional reading and Wikipediaing. We won't have time to get into all of them today, but we will touch on some of the major ones.
And the whole history of Constantine, fighting that battle under the cross, and making that the what became sort of the de facto religion of Rome after is really
meaning converting it to Christianity.
Exactly.
Yeah. And that's
from paganism.
Then there's the Arch of Constantine that you can go and to sort of commemorate that today. But let's stick in ancient Rome. Let's go back to the Colosseum, like you were talking about. Now, did you actually went on a full tour of it?
Yes, I did. I did a full tour of the Colosseum, not with a guide, but actually this was fun because I was looking for on Apple Podcast something I could kind of listen to while I was in the Colosseum. And sure enough, Rick Steves has a whole 35-minute walk through the Colosseum.
Yeah, Rick touched on this in our interview, which is he just kind of lightly said how much free content Rick Steves Europe does, but his audio tours are a great treasure for exactly that sort of thing. And Ryan, you did exactly what I like to do, which is if I know I'm going to be able to have my earphones in, you just do some quick Googling, whether it's Rick or other historical guides. There's so many good podcasts out there, and it would be great if we could eventually get to the point where we're doing those sorts of in-depth just to a single site.
Yeah, it's fun because it you start outside, it tells you to pause it, you walk in, you unpause it, and then it kind of take you through the different areas. Now, definitely get your tickets in advance. One thing I'll say is there are multiple ticket options. There's a ticket option called the full access, which is significantly more expensive, and it lets you go onto the field on one side of the Colosseum. And I was really disappointed because I thought, oh no, I'm not going to get to go on the field. Totally untrue. When you come around to the end of the tour, they dump you out on the other side of the field. So the all access just gets you a different view of the same thing. It's totally not necessary. And you should be very satisfied with just the regular ticket, which gets you, you can see the entirety basically of the Colosseum.
And the Colosseum itself, it's exactly the popular portrayal of what went on here. This is a 2,000-year-old building. It was completed in 80 AD. This is kind of peak Roman Empire, gladiator fights. And one of the things that historians focus on as the Republic became the empire, the dictatorship, is that there was a real focus on public entertainment, which was, allowing the spoils of the empire to be seen and enjoyed in sometimes, ways that to a modern sensibility seem very violent. And the Colosseum was one of these gladiator fields. And what's interesting to me is how accessible they made it. This Colosseum could fit 50,000 people. And if that wows you, wait until we talk about the Circus Maximus, which is where chariot rides went on, where they could hit 250,000 people, which when you just think they were making this to be mass market, this was public entertainment.
Absolutely. I mean, it was part of the character of Rome. Something that's interesting about the Colosseum is back in 80 AD when it was built, it would have been covered in a limestone, like a marble.
Mm-hmm.
So it would have been mostly white or beige. And then there would have been colorful statues in all of the areas where they now sort of have photos of statues. But again, the statues they have photos of are like the marble statues that we think of today. Those would have all been painted crazy colors too. So just imagine what that would have looked like to somebody who wasn't from Rome, who shows up in Rome for, to pay their taxes or whatever. They're like, oh, okay, this is why we pay taxes to Rome. Look at the power. Look at the beauty.
Yeah, if you're traveling to Rome with kids, I absolutely insist that you do some Googling to show them what the sort of garish colors that historians believe these statues and buildings had on them, because it's so easy to get lost into the like white marble take that we see in places because the pigments have all rubbed off. But there's still plenty of statues where there is a residue of the paints that were on them. And so we know, Ryan, as you say, these were very, very loud, colorful places to be. And, the ingeniousness of Roman engineering, which we all famously know from aqueducts and these grand temples, really, really shown in the Colosseum because it's so enormous and it's these incredibly heavy blocks of stone, all supported by these sort of quintessential archways that define the outline of the Colosseum.
Yeah, the amount they were able to do without like high level mathematics is pretty amazing.
Also, when we were saying it was built and finished in 80 AD, gladiator fights actually happened there straight through to 435 AD. So this was like a good run.
That's a good run.
And the gladiator games could take many different forms. What's interesting when you are in the Colosseum is you look down and what you're actually seeing is many, many tunnels. This is sort of the backstage of the fighting because there would have been a wooden floor covered with sand and many, many elevator shafts that allowed animals, fighters, and even stage sets to come up from underground. So you could see where they would substantiate out a whole day worth of entertainment because they could really set the scene. And you had gladiators, some of whom specialized. I mean, this was like their career. This was their way out of slavery. This was how they became famous fighters. But you also had prisoners who were captured from lands where the empire was conquering and bringing them back. You had Christians who were being put to death. And
probably not in the Colosseum.
No, I know it wasn't one of the main sites, but they do believe that some were probably killed there.
Well, yeah, I think it's up for debate.
But you're right. Primarily, it was gladiators. And one of the things that's really cool about the animals, if you think about it, this is obviously an era before photographs and before mass distribution of illustrations and paintings. So nobody had seen a tiger or an elephant or a hippo, or a crocodile. Good Lord, can you imagine seeing a crocodile
they show up
for the first time?
To them, these are just beasts. These are just mythological beasts. This wild hippo or something. So it's interesting to imagine like what it would have been like for just sort of your normal Roman to just see a bear come out of nowhere and start fighting with a gladiator.
Normal Romans. How about if you were one of the prisoners who'd never seen a hippo?
Yeah.
Well, where do you even start to poke at it?
Yeah, you just pray and one of your many gods and hope that your blade's tough.
And Ryan, one of the places that is an essential place to visit on a trip to Rome is the Roman Forum, and this is kind of the center square of Rome during the major switch to, well, really throughout the whole period that we're talking about, because it's where the original Senate was, it's where Caesar's palace was, and now where several of the most important and well-preserved temples stand. And you can buy a ticket that gets you into the Roman Forum and to the Palatine Hill. Palatine Hill has more ruins than preserved structures, but I really recommend a day where you focus just on these two. And there are so many buildings that are preserved and so much history that any sort of guided tour, a podcast guide from Rick Steves like you're talking about is a good fit if you want to actually take in spot by spot. But we're just going to talk about a couple of the major hitters. One thing to think about the Forum is that this is where, when the conqueror military came in, with a deposed king who they brought in from Eastern Europe, and then tens and probably hundreds of prisoners to show the kind of might and glory of the empire. They'd have a big parade with music and flowers, present them to the emperor. This is where that would happen. So another place where the citizenry would gather to celebrate how much the empire was giving to them. So you had kind of the violent spectacle at the Colosseum, and here a grand political argument about why there was strength in Rome. And there's many different temples and political buildings that you can explore here. But just to focus on a couple that I think tell the story most importantly. The first is the main square of the Forum, which is where, if you were standing in ancient Rome and looking around you, this is where all those grand buildings would ring. And you can see near the main square the Temple of Julius Caesar. And it's interesting, for Julius Caesar, obviously stabbed to death by senators who were rejecting the way that he was taking the politics. But Caesar gained literal godlike status. And so this temple was built just in front of where he actually lived. And his myth only grew after his death. And obviously the emperors who were after him were claiming their power from him directly, especially his adopted son, who was really making the empire work. And so interesting to see this kind of first temple to a man-made god. In addition, the Senate House is not far. It's called the Curia, and this is a building that the 300 senators of Rome, when it was proudly a republic pre-Caesar, this is where they deliberated and made the laws. And so, if you there's no greater juxtaposition of those two different political systems than having them so close together within the Roman Forum. And then finally, one of the most evocative for me that takes you kind of out of this world of politics that you see between Caesar and the Senate is the Temple of Saturn. And there's not a lot of it left, but the columns that stand give you a sense of how important this god was to the Roman people. And this temple itself was considered really the center of the Roman mythology, the Temple of Saturn. And so, I think one great exercise for all of these ruins that you see is try to take a moment to really picture them in their glory, build it out in your imagination, and think of those colorful decorations like what Ryan was said, and the religious festivals that happened in these places. That's how they'll really come to life for you.
Yeah, and this stretch of Rome that you're talking about is really epic. I mean, there's just so many ruins, and like you said, you can get a ticket, you can go in. There's also a park that you can walk around and get great views of everything. So that's where I actually saw.
Much of it, to your point, much of it is you can see from street level. I mean, you should buy the ticket and go in to really be ensconced in it, but you can't. You will come upon it in the same way that Ryan came upon the Colosseum on the way to his hotel. Also near the Forum is this grand column called Trajan's Column. I've always been really enamored of this column.
Love Trajan's Column.
I love Trajan's Column. I'm obsessed with it. Trajan is a Roman emperor, and the story of that is carved into this 140-foot column, which again is just humongous, has 2,500 sculpted figures in it and tells the story of Trajan's conquest of Romania. I'm trying to tie it to your recent travels, Ryan. And so from the bottom to the top, spiraling around the column, it tells the story of this military victory. And there's gods and there's fights and there's prisoners. And it's kind of, I think of this as like the comic book of ancient Rome. And it still stands there today, open to the public. public, incredibly evocative. So take time. I would even say, if you have room in your backpack to put binoculars in there, put them in, because you're going to want to see the fine details, even way up at the top. It's really, really cool.
I had a reason to go back column. Marcus Aurelius has a column dedicated to him in Rome as well, and his many victories. And I pretend to be a Stoic, so I'm into Marcus. But unfortunately, it was completely covered because they're doing a huge restoration that will debut at some point, I think, next year. So, Rome's one of those cities where not everything's going to be open all the time, because these are really old things that need to constantly get TLC.
Well, and speaking of that, Palatine Hill, which is adjacent to the Forum, which is the hill where the giant imperial palaces once stood. And many of these emperors, they took a palace that was already there, they made it enormous, they added all these different rooms, then that would fall into ruin, they'd build another over and over and over again. So this is really the place that I'm talking about, where you can't drop a shovel into the ground without hitting some important artifacts. So this was where the giant imperial palaces stood, and particularly the famous one that is somewhat preserved here was by Domitian in 81 AD. But what I find most charming is that there is a site there called the Huts of Romulus, and this is supposed to be where Romulus was taken in by the shepherd, and where his sort of earliest huts on the hill that became Rome, lives. And so they actually have some archival evidence that maybe there's a little bit of truth behind this Romulus and Remus story.
There's a lot of hills in Rome, and a lot of, hills where people died, and then they built St. Peter's. It's like that kind of place where every hill has like a myth to go along with it.
Yes. Yeah, Ryan. And famously, that takes the shape of the 7 hills of Rome. That's what they call. And I always find it kind of funny because Somerville, Massachusetts claims 7 hills, which is like, yeah, these are very similar. And many of them were torn down for landfill. Somehow in Rome, they actually got preserved. But actually, Palatine Hill, there's a fun little Easter egg in there, which is it's what gave us the word palace in English. Palatine became palace. So that just gives you a sense of how grand it was that it carried over and persists today. And also from the hill, you get a view over on the ruins of Circus Maximus, which I mentioned, which is a famous chariot racing forum. So you've got the blood in the Colosseum, the parades going on over in the Forum, and the chariot races a la Ben-Hur happening in Circus Maximus. And again, I just go back to that figure of 250,000, Romans, including a lot of workers and average Joes who, probably weren't bathing that much. That was probably a real spectacle, and I would say an olfactory experience to be among that many.
And this area from the Colosseum on down, it's as many tourists as anywhere I've ever been. I mean, it's like Times Square.
Yes, that's right. Really now, Ryan, wild. I believe you visited the baths of Diocletian, right?
I did go to the baths of Diocletian.
So, I make the point about the sanitary practices, but these baths show, how people recreated and cleaned themselves.
Yeah, so this is, it's an interesting museum that's got a couple different things going on. It was like the main public baths, and it's just huge and epic inside and really beautiful. And when I was there, they had a sculpture exhibit. So there was these sort of modern sculptures sort of among the baths. And there's an area where you can take a step out and into sort of a courtyard where none of it has been restored. So it's just like, maybe they've restored 30% of it, right? And then there's just huge other area that you can kind of walk around some of it and just get an idea of how big it was, and just, how much work goes into preserving these things. But another thing that's sort of interesting about that museum is back in the 1500s, Michelangelo was in charge of a restoration project there, and built this sort of church and this big courtyard that's quite beautiful. And one of the funny things about Rome is you'll be walking around and you'll see like a random gate, and you'll click on it on your Google Maps, like what's this gate all about? And it's like designed by Michelangelo, and it's like it's just full of things like that. Yeah.
That's funny. And was Diocletian the emperor who actually like built these baths?
I think so. Yeah.
It's funny because it reminded me when Catherine and I were in Split, Croatia. They actually have the preserved palace of Diocletian there, and it is incredibly well preserved. So you can picture these Roman emperors. They have their public works projects, the baths, their imperial palaces in the city of Rome, and then they had their escapes. And there's something in me. I have this dream in retirement that I'll go to Europe for like 6 months, 9 months at a stretch, and I'll just follow. Okay, now I'm going to do Hadrian's path through Europe. Now I'm going to do Diocletian's path through Europe.
Yeah, I mean, he loved to travel. And, one of the things that he saw out on his travels inspired him when he came back to Rome to build one of the most famous buildings in the world. And that is the Pantheon.
Of course, the Pantheon, absolutely.
Yeah. So one thing I'll say again about the Pantheon, get your tickets early, get to skip the line if you can. I have a really funny skip the line story here.
Oh boy! Did you like become a member of the Churchill war rooms?
Well, this was a skip the line that isn't sanctioned. So essentially, we meet the guide. He walks us over, and I see that there's a huge line to get in of people who have time tickets. So I'm like, oh, that's a big line. But then I notice there's a little clump of guides who are near the front, and he has 8 of us or 9 of us with him, and he goes down and he starts talking to the guides, and he does a chat and cut in front of the line, and we're all with him, right? He's our guide. And so it's like, we just got to do this cut. So everyone's glaring at me, and I'm usually
oh my god, I am very much against this tip. I am a rule follower. I believe the rules.
I do too. I would never have done this on my own. I would have waited in the line, and me and this French girl kept looking at each other, and she's like, "Do you know what's happening right now?" I'm like, "Yes, I do. It's really weird."
Yes, I do.
And we just cut in front of all these people with our guide in a chat and cut. So yeah. That's my
that is nefarious, and I really feel very bad about it, and I apologize if any of those people who saw you, if any of the fans spotted you. Is that Ryan Davis? I thought he was a man of the people.
Gosh, the worst. But this is another one where Rick Steves has a great 30-minute guide on Apple Podcast that walk you around and show you all the important things inside the building. I mean, it is quite the building, right? So the outside, it looks like the U.S. Capitol. It's got those big columns, the classic. And then behind it on the outside, it's sort of like a big circle, like a big dome, but it's not like beautiful, and it's like, oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, it's stately.
It's stately, maybe. But then when you walk in, it's a whole other experience.
Well, it's really the best preserved of ancient Roman buildings that exists. And that's because it passed in to Christian hands, became a church. And so it was kept up
it's been continuously in use. Yeah,
and a lot, one thing we didn't mention is a lot of the ruins out there, including the Colosseum, later generations took all this beautiful stone and marble off of it because they were building other buildings, and especially churches. And so a lot of the churches that are around, which we're hardly talking about any outside of the Vatican, but there's a ton of historic churches around Rome that we'll get to in the next episode. Many of them are built out of Roman rocks that were first part of Roman imperial buildings.
And to build the Colosseum, they had to destroy this huge house that belonged to Nero. So like there's like ruins upon ruins upon ruins going on there.
And so for the Pantheon, the version that we're seeing today has been remade many times, but it's the approximate outline of what the Emperor Hadrian, who we've mentioned a couple times, actually envisioned. And this dome that Ryan was touching on, this is kind of the dome that latched 1,000 domes. The dome in St. Peter's, the dome of the U.S. Capitol, so many of them draw inspiration from this iconic dome. But the most important piece of it is that there is a hole, a 30-foot hole right in the middle of it that's called the oculus.
Yes, the Oculus, which is now kind of a wild building in New York, but originally was this whole.
Yeah. And the crazy thing is the Oculus is open to the elements. When it rains in Rome, rain pours in through the Oculus into this historic building.
One of the things that's really wild about this dome is that, it's been around for like 2,000 years, and it is still the largest unreinforced dome on the planet. Isn't that incredible?
It's incredible. And the other, if you're trying to envision it, it is as tall as it is wide. So it would create a perfect sphere from side to side and top to the floor of the Pantheon if you could fit an enormous sphere in there. So it's just its depth is kind of hard to take in when you're standing on the floor, but it's really, really high up. And the structure of it is constantly studied for its engineering brilliance. But basically the stones, which are enormous at the base, thin out as they approach that oculus at the top.
Right, so the materials get lighter and lighter as you get to the very top of the dome. And I should say there is another dome that's larger in Florence, but that uses all sorts of structures and materials to sort of reinforce it. This dome does not. This is pure math and architecture.
And the final point on the Pantheon is that, as I said, it became a Christian church, and so all those Roman statues were ripped out, and saints and Virgin Mary went in. But also there are several notable tombs. Most notably, the artist Raphael is born there at the Pantheon.
And you can't escape Raphael when you're in Rome.
No, that's true.
So the one art museum that we're going to mention today is the Borghese Gallery, which is an incredible old gallery that was one guy's like massive art collection that has now, he was an important guy. He was like a cardinal or something, and now has become this incredible museum in Rome. This is another one. Get advance tickets because you just can't buy tickets there the day of. They're just not available, so you have to book in advance. And every room, you're allowed to be there for 2 hours. I had a really good guide who spoke English. This was my only English tour, and he was very funny and tried to engage our group. But every single room is just filled to the brim with art. So there'll be a massive sculpture in the middle. There'll be an incredible amount of paintings on the walls, and then basically you'll just have everything painted. I mean, there are rooms that are like mini Sistine chapels, in the gallery. And some of the things that really stood out for me were some of these statues that are just really incredible by this guy Bernini, who I didn't know a lot about prior to this, but who was like an early Renaissance sculptor, and everything he did, the three pieces there he made all in his late teens and 20s, and all made out of single piece of marble, and they're all just sort of incredible. They're what you think of when you think of a classic Roman sculpture. Like, these are that.
And do you, when you said book tickets in advance, this is another epic line?
No, it's not an epic line at all.
Oh, okay.
Because you can't buy tickets the day of, so there's only tickets in advance. So you just
are the galleries crowded?
Not that crowded. Okay. They do a pretty good job. Like, and they announce, like, if you're a green sticker person, it's time for you to leave. So they're moving you in and out. But 2 hours is plenty of time to like get the lay of the land and to see everything. I didn't feel rushed.
Sounds great. Well, the final two places that are quintessential Rome, Ryan, that these go a bit beyond the Roman Empire, but I feel like we can't do a first trip of Rome without mentioning them, are the Trevi Fountain and the Spanish Steps. And the Trevi Fountain is this enormous fountain. And when you think of Rome and throwing a coin into the fountain for good luck and prosperity and going on a romantic date with gelato, the Trevi Fountain is what pops to mind. And the fountain itself actually actually dates to 1742. It was done by this artist named Nicola Salvi. But what's interesting is even though it's later artwork, the water itself is drawn from the Roman aqueduct system. And, we didn't dive too much into the water management system of ancient Rome, but this is one of the great architectural achievements, engineering achievements of Rome, is that they could source clean, fresh water for the population. And this fountain was actually a place with its 42 spouts and its very dramatic setting where people would come for water, though today I wouldn't recommend drinking it.
Yeah, well, good luck getting close enough to it.
Yeah, it's packed. It's packed all times a day. I mean, it's so picturesque. It's like it's impossible not to go, but it's not exactly Times Square, but it's got a feel.
This is the place that I stumbled upon because I was just walking home. I had planned to go on a different day, and then I walked by it, and it was just like, wow. What's funny is there are just so many other smaller fountains that are quite beautiful and worth seeing where there's nobody. So
yeah.
You again, just like walking around, you're going to see stuff that might not be the number 1 or 2 fountain in Rome, but if it was anywhere else, it would be like the main thing to see. So it's gorge. And
in the Trevi Fountain, you have a figure of Neptune and a figure of Triton emerging from the water. You have horses emerging from the water. And I remember thinking it's very loud. The water. I mean, there's quite a volume to it because it's kind of in this closed-in courtyard, and it's very well lit. That's right. Yeah. It's beautiful. I would say visiting at night is really something special.
Yeah, I'd like to go back at night. I went during the day. And, I had perfect weather the whole trip, so I can't complain about that. And apparently I went during not a peak season of tourism because summer was just starting. But wow, it was it was one of those places where you had to wait in line to walk down the street kind of thing.
Yeah. Well, and another one of those places where when you go to Rome, chances are you're going to shoot a picture here. And so we just have to mention it is the Spanish Steps. And these are these incredibly wide steps, very beautiful, 138 steps up, like right in the heart of the city, which again goes back to this idea of Rome as a very hilly city. And it's actually where the reason it's called the Spanish Steps, if you're wondering, is because this is where at the top the Spanish embassy to the Vatican has been for centuries. And so it's a place where it has a lot of rich history of people traveling through Rome, visiting and pondering the city upon these steps.
Yeah, and there's a ton of beautiful embassies all around Rome that you just could sort of stumble upon. It was funny. I was having coffee at this little French cafe, which was nearby the French embassy. And it was the day of Pope Francis's funeral. And all of a sudden there's this huge motorcade and all this excitement. And there's a helicopter and it's Emmanuel Macron going into the embassy following the... Wow.
Yeah. Did you see that both Biden and Trump went to the funeral?
Well, Biden's actually Catholic. And,
yes, sure. He had a good reason to go.
In fact, he might be elected Pope. He's still young enough. So
that's good. That's good, Ryan. Well, I knew I was going to feel this when I got to the end. I feel like we've just scratched the surface. The next time I want to do a grab bag of some major attractions that we didn't get to. There's major museums, the National Museum of Rome, the Capitoline museums. There are so many great museums that I want to do some spotlights on. And then there's just a mess of places. I was there for long enough that I got to go see these catacombs where these Catholic monks, these Capuchins, they decorate it with the bones of all the brothers for 100 years. I mean, it's really creepy and crazy Catholic stuff that we can bring into the next one. There's a Roman ruin that's preserved underground that's completely overtaken by cats, and stray cats live there.
Gosh.
Did you come upon that?
No, I would have gone to that.
I got to tell you about that one. So there's so many great things for part 2. So we got the Vatican, we got First Trip to Rome part 1, and soon First Trip to Rome part 2. And you know what? If you've got a great idea of something you want us to spotlight or talk about it on the next one, shoot it over to the email outofofficepod@gmail.com.
Or podcast on Instagram.
Podcast. Can you put some Rome pictures up this week, please?
I'm going to put so many Rome pictures.
All right. I'll dig up some of mine too. It'll be fun.
Cool. Well, Kiernan, I think it's time for the last stop.
The last stop.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is the last stop on this train. Everyone, please leave the train.
All right, Ryan. Well, we're here in the last stop. This is the final segment of the show, the last segment of the show. It's my favorite segment. It's your favorite segment. It's popularly known as the People's segment, which is very true to the SPQR People of Rome spirit, and that's because it is very democratic. We share with each other. We come to decisions. We are open and honest, and we have a good faith discussion here of two things: one thing from you, one thing from me. We each episode bring a thing. It could be anything. Could be a story, could be a travel tip, could be an article, could be an Instagram account, could be another podcast, could be an old episode of Out of Office. But it does have to fit one criterion. It must inspire the spirit of wanderlust within us, even during the workaday week. So Ryan, I'm going to ask you, as I ask you every episode, do you have a last stop this week?
I do, Kiernan. I'm breaking the rules a little bit. I'm going a little bit deeper into Rome, but
no, that's not allowed in the last stop. What the heck?
I was so excited. You know me, I'm a huge fan of Saint Sebastian. We've talked about him on the pod before. I'm getting a Saint Sebastian tattoo. I'm all in on Saint Sebastian. You see,
and why Saint Sebastian? Why are you into Saint Sebastian?
Well, he is sort of the patron saint of the gays. And so I feel like it connects my Catholic youth and my other life. So there's only one place in the world where there's any historical connection to Saint Sebastian, and that is in Rome. There's a church dedicated to him where his remains lie, and there's a sculpture of him, being hit by arrows, and then there's his
which I assume among the gay community is seen as a metaphor.
It's definitely a metaphor. The piercing. And so yeah, it was super cool to see. It's out of the way. I was the only. They were actually doing mass there, so I wasn't the only person. I was the only person there to actually see San Sebastian, and it was really cool. I'll post a picture. And I didn't have tickets, but they have catacombs there that are also available if you book in advance. They're not connected to San Sebastian. They predate the church, but just another example of just the infinite things you could do if you wanted to in Rome. So Saint Sebastian, if you're a fan of his, this is the place to see where he is buried for eternity. And they also have their Peter's footprints, which I have to tell you, not the most impressive thing that I've seen. It seems like a stretch.
That seems like a real snake oil sort of Catholic. Yeah. Oh, you know what? And we also have these footprints, and they happen to be from St. Peter. Who knew?
Who knew? He has very big feet, St. Peter. So that's my.
Maybe the gays should be considering him for a little attention.
Did you bring a last stop, Kiernan?
You know what? I'm gonna cheat too. If you're cheating, I'm gonna cheat. I have two, Ryan. The first is to double down on Rome. I don't talk very much on the podcast about my deep and abiding love for Lego, but I do love Lego, and I build a lot of Lego.
I know exactly what you're going to talk about.
With Cha-Cha, my son Charlie. And mostly those are Star Wars, but there is a set that I've been eyeballing where Lego has this set that it's a series that they aim at adults called Lego Architecture, and they actually created the Trevi Fountain out of Lego, and it is very, very cool. It's got 1,880 pieces, which is very manageable, and I do have my eye on it. I'm not somebody who decorates the house with Lego, which like real creators and collectors do, but given Catherine's classicist background, I just think the Trevi Fountain seems like it needs a place in our Lego collection.
So I thought you were going to say the Colosseum, because that's gone viral in the last 2 weeks. The Colosseum,
yes, the thing is,
cats like to sleep in it.
Yeah. So is it
really $600?
Yeah. Oh, I mean, Legos are very expensive, and likely to get much more so based on the tariffs. No, seriously, like they're gonna get very expensive. Lego, by the way, moving their U.S. headquarters to Boston. Very much interested in that.
Well, Lincoln Logs are still tariff free. Okay?
That's very funny. So there's no Log Trevi Fountain to my knowledge, but yes, they do have a Colosseum. I personally like the Legos where they have like figures, and you're talking about a line where they do great architecture, but it's like at such a small scale that you can do the entire Colosseum.
And the cats love it.
I did not know that, so you might have to repost a link
I will find. There's so many photos of cats sleeping in the Colosseum. It's really funny.
All right, Ryan. Well, and this one is to commemorate a trip that you and I took, a little news piece from Mammoth Cave National Park. This is a feel-good piece of news, and there's a fun photo of it too, which is there was a swearing-in ceremony of new U.S. citizens that was held in Mammoth Cave National Park, actually down where you and I were exploring, and that's where they took the swearing-in ceremony.
So we're disappearing people to.
I'm trying to keep it positive here. This was 29 new citizens from 12 different countries, and right down there in Mammoth Cave, a very memorable place to do it.
I can't think of a more beautiful place to do it. So welcome to the U.S., folks.
And, I hope that the national parks manage to thrive amidst all the cuts. It's something I think about a lot. I'm very worried about it. See, you took me to a dark place. I didn't even want to go there.
So Kiernan, on the next episode, I want to talk about Romania 101 from a high level. I was going to do like a Bucharest episode, and I feel like it's just worth talking about on a high level. And then if there's interest, we can kind of go deeper. So I'm excited to talk about it, though, because I was there for 3 weeks, and I was in 3 different cities over the course of my travels, and I have a lot to say.
Sounds great. I can't wait.
Until then, I'm Ryan Davis.
And I'm Kiernan Schmidt.
And this is Out of Office, a travel podcast.
This seat taken. Are you going to do the whole Romania episode in the sort of that classic Dracula? Oh, and now you have to get the bus.
Oh, they would hate that.